So I'm up in the bush going for a ride, as I often do, and I, on this particular trail, come across this bad boy. Now, this is a rock slide. It's hard to sort of really tell, but it's about 50-degree angle and about 20 odd meters long. It's a bit wet and it's a bit slippery, and you can sort of see the angle by looking at the cliff over there. And I'm trying to decide whether I'll do that one. I'd like to do it if it was really dry, but something that people say is, believe in yourself. Believe in yourself because you should know that you can do it. And that's all very fine if you know what that person's ability is. So, if you've done those sorts of things before, you might believe that you can do it. And it's interesting, guys tend to want to overestimate how good they are, and they believe in themselves maybe too much. And girls often will underestimate and need a bit more encouragement. So that can be a good sort of thing to note when we're sort of encouraging people to do things. So, believe in yourself. And it's like, well, what does believe really mean? Having belief in yourself. And it got me thinking about our belief in God. And I guess when we initially start out, our belief is our understanding. We know that God is real. And then it sort of moves to incorporate maybe the word faith. And faith maybe has this element of practicality there, where we have to live our belief. And it's faith. Faith is belief in action. And I'm like, well, some people seem to be belief or faith giants, and they never seem to doubt, and other people sort of seem to be struggling. And how can we judge that? And how can we make our own belief or our own faith grow in how we live? And I think David is a great example of this. And we sort of introduced to David in the Bible in Samuel. First and Second Samuel, amazing books. So if you want an interesting books to read in the Bible, awesome place to start. And so David is considered the underdog, and nobody really believes in him because his dad, Jesse, doesn't really believe in him. He brings his other sons towards to Samuel for a blessing, and he leaves David in the field. And Samuel says, "Hey, do you have any more sons? These sons are not the right ones." And he says, "Oh, there's only David." So nobody really believes in him initially in his life, and so we pick up this sort of understanding, and then we sort of travel on into David's life a bit further, and we're sort of introduced to the David and Glyce story, and we probably see this story most often as the faith that David has, or the belief he has in himself, and the belief he has in God. And so we've got this notion of this young boy who really doesn't know what he's doing. He has no understanding about war and about true battles, and we get this understanding that Saul sort of says, "Yeah, sure, off you go. You can go and face Goliath." And I guess the wager is, you got this Goliath guy who is a giant, and he says, "I'll fight one of you guys, and whoever wins gets to take the others captive." So the wager is pretty big on this fight, right? And this nobody wants to take on. Saul should be the guy to do it because he's the king. He's probably the most battle ready. He's taller than everybody else. There's all these things about it, but Saul's too scared. And David, this young boy, comes along, and he says, "I'll do it." And we're just like, "What do you mean you'll do it?" And Saul says, "Okay," and in he goes to battle. And we often go through this story and we don't sort of stop. But why does he say it's okay that David should go into battle? Is this blind, let's just sacrifice David? And it can't be, because the wager is that all of the Israelites will become slaves. So Saul is not a dumb guy, and all the Israelites are not dumb. They're not going to just send in a boy to, face a giant. And so I think there's a bit missing in this story, and I guess not missing, but we've got to join some of the dots. And I would suggest that David went through some trials. I reckon Saul got him out the back and he set up some stuff, and he said, all right, well, you only just use your sling, so show me how good you are. And he slings his sling and he hits this, this bucket on a post, and he's like, wow, that's pretty good. And so Saul's belief that David can actually do it starts to grow. And David says, I've actually killed bears and lions. So this is not just a measly slingshot. This is a little bit more serious. And this sling, is more than what first meets the eye. And we actually know that there were armies of slingers back then. So these armies would come along, and they were often left-handed, so that they could, still use their right hand to be able to use a sword. And they would have slingers who made up whole battalions in the army. And doing some more research about the Balearic slingers in the past, they could sling a stone up to 400 meters, and that would often outsling many of the archers. And so, here he's killed these guys, these animals, and it also says in Judges that this army of Israelite slingers could hit a hare without missing every time. And that's pretty incredible, because, a hare or a rabbit, runs around pretty crazy, and they were that accurate. They could hit and kill a hare every time. So David's had a lot of practice. And so when Saul sends David into battle, he's actually got some element of belief there. And we know that David wins, right? He slings this sling into Goliath's head, smacks him in the head, and then goes and grabs his own Goliath sword and chops his head off. Great ending to the story, and they win. But what's interesting here is that David's faith in God and his belief actually then transfers to Saul even before the event happens, and then it transfers to the whole Israelite army. And this amazing sense of renewed belief in David as a person, but also in God. And so this one person who has this belief and faith that God can help him out, is transferred to a whole nation, and they're in some ways spiritually revived. And eventually the power transfers to David, and Saul dies, and David is this great man who leads the army. And I think the one last thing I wanted to sort of point out, which is very interesting, is there's not only the belief that David has in himself, because he's actually had the practice and he knows how good he is. He can take on, a sling, and he's a good shot. But the belief that he has in God, because things go wrong and sometimes you miss, but he knew that God would be with him, and he consulted God. But the faith that, the Israelite army sort of, and Saul has because of him. And lastly, the faith that God has in David. God has this, amazing faith that David, this shepherd boy who is a nothing, can actually do amazing things. And he says, I have the faith in you. So may you know that God believes in you. And in return, that I hope that you can believe in God, and that your faith in God can then infiltrate the people around you, and develop other people's faith. And I think that's the powerful message. I hope you are able to grow your faith today.